Friends, let's get into another video here on the channel, and today's topic is something that deserves a closer look. If you wanted to understand the state of this war in a single day, July 6th gave you everything you needed. Russia bombed Kyiv for the second time in 5 days. J.D. Vance told Ukraine to stop attacking. Zelensky arrived at the NATO summit without enough missiles to stop a ballistic threat, and the alliance declaration was still being held up by an Italian veto. All of this happened in the 24 hours before the most consequential NATO summit in years opened in Ankara. Today we're not just going to report what happened. We're going to trace the logic connecting all 4 of these pieces because each one is a symptom of the same underlying condition, and together they tell you exactly how fragile the Western position in this war actually is. Let's start with what Russia did overnight, because it was designed to land on a very specific audience. Ballistic missiles and drones hit Kyiv in the early hours of July 6th, killing at least 14 people in the city and 3 more in the surrounding Kyiv region. An entire family was pulled from the rubble of a collapsed apartment building in the Darnitsky district, the same district that was heavily damaged in the attack 5 days earlier. Cars burned on city streets. Rescuers evacuated residents, including children, from the upper floors of damaged buildings, while most of the capital spent hours in underground shelters. Russia has now struck Kyiv twice in 5 days, killing over 45 people combined in just those 2 attacks. The Kremlin, as usual, claimed it was retaliating for Ukrainian strikes on Russian energy infrastructure, a framing that conveniently ignores the fact that the overwhelming majority of casualties in both attacks were civilians in residential neighborhoods, not military targets. But here's the strategic timing that matters most. This attack happened on the eve of the NATO summit. Zelensky said it himself in a post on X just hours before the missiles hit. This is typical of Putin right after America's Independence Day and before the NATO summit in Ankara. Russia is not bombing Kyiv to achieve a military objective. It is bombing Kyiv to set the diplomatic table, and the message it wants sitting at that table when Trump arrives is simple: this war has no bottom. Now here's the detail that Zelensky added, and it is the most operationally significant thing he has said in weeks. He said that Ukraine was unable to shoot down any ballistic missiles in the July 6th attack, specifically because of an insufficient supply of interceptor missiles for its Patriot systems. This was not a failure of the air defense network. It was a resupply failure. The missiles to feed the Patriot launchers ran out. That sentence is the single most important sentence Zelensky has uttered heading into Ankara. He is not asking for new weapon systems. He is asking for ammunition for systems. He already has systems that were supposed to be continuously resupplied by allies who pledged to do exactly that. The gap between what allies promised and what they delivered is not new, but the Kyiv attack made it viscerally concrete. When there are no interceptors left in the launcher, the building falls, the family dies, and the alliance that pledged continuous support has to explain why the shelves were empty. Now let's bring in J.D. Vance, because what the American Vice President said on July 6th creates a direct and uncomfortable tension with everything Zelensky is asking for. In an interview with the Sunday Times, Vance made 2 things clear. First, the Trump administration believes Ukraine should abandon offensive operations entirely and focus on defense. The Trump administration is inclined to believe that the Ukrainians, while we are negotiating, should go on the defensive as much as possible, he said. Second, and this part has been underreported, he said something analytically interesting. The Russians are in a place right now where the amount that they can get through continued offensive operations is vanishingly small and getting close to zero. Now read those 2 statements together carefully, because they are in tension with each other. If Russia's offensive capacity is approaching zero, if Moscow is bleeding out at a rate of 30,000 casualties per month for territorial gains measured in meters, then why would the United States tell Ukraine to go defensive? Why would you lock in a freeze that preserves Russian gains when, according to your own vice president, Russia is running out of the ability to make more of them? The answer is not military. It is political. The Trump administration wants a ceasefire. It can announce before the Ankara summit closes. A Ukraine that stops attacking is a Ukraine that can be brought to a table. And a table is a photo. And a photo is a win. The logic is entirely domestic American, and it has almost nothing to do with the strategic reality on the ground in Donetsk. Zelensky's response to Vance's position has been consistent. Throughout, Ukraine will defend, but it will also strike. Because defense without the ability to hit Russian logistics, fuel depots, and refineries is not defense. It is slow strangulation. The moment Ukraine stops its long-range campaign, Russia can rebuild its supply chains, refill its fuel reserves, and resume the kind of sustained pressure on the front line that forces Ukraine to bleed through its own stocks faster than allies can refill them. The long-range drone campaign is not separate from Ukraine's defensive posture. It is the mechanism that makes the defensive posture sustainable. Vance is asking Ukraine to give up the one strategy that has been measurably working. Now let's add the NATO declaration picture, because this is where all of the above converges into a single institutional test. According to Reuters, the draft Ankara declaration commits to €70 billion in military support for Ukraine in 2026 and maintains support in 2027, at least at an equivalent level. It reaffirms Article 5, describes Russia as a long-term threat, and commits all 32 members to continued collective defense. But the declaration was still not final as of July 6. Italy was still blocking, and the United States had already weakened the language on Ukraine's long-term security ties to European security. A document that was supposed to signal Western unity is being negotiated, line by line, between governments that have fundamentally different answers to the question of what this war is for. Here is what we know about the summit structure. It opens July 7th at the Betepe presidential compound in Ankara with a defense industry forum. The full North Atlantic Council session, the one where all 32 heads of state sit in the room together, happens on July 8th. Trump will meet Zelensky bilaterally on July 8th, and, according to Reuters, is expected to call Putin immediately after. That sequence, Trump meets Zelensky, then calls Putin, is the most important diplomatic choreography of the entire summit. It tells you that the United States is positioning itself as the active intermediary, not a passive attendee. But it also means that whatever Zelensky says to Trump in that bilateral will immediately be tested by what Putin says on the phone call that follows. Zelensky will need to give Trump something he can take to that phone call, something that makes a ceasefire proposal credible enough for Putin to engage with. But Zelensky cannot give Trump anything that surrenders the economic siege strategy he has been running, because that strategy is the only leverage Ukraine currently has over Russia's ability to sustain this war. That is the impossible geometry of July 8th in Ankara. And what makes it more impossible is that Russia walked into that diplomatic room by bombing an apartment building the night before, reminding every leader at the table exactly what happens when the pressure on Moscow is released. Putin's message to Ankara is not delivered in a speech or a statement. It is delivered in rubble, in the Darnitsky district, in Kyiv, at 3 in the morning. And the question every leader at the summit must answer is, what does this alliance do when that message keeps arriving and the declaration still can't be finalized? Now I want to know what you think. Vance says Ukraine should go defensive while Russia's offensive capacity approaches zero. Zelensky says stopping the long-range campaign is strategic suicide. Who is right? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because this conversation matters, and your perspective adds real value to it. If this video gave you real value, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next breakdown.